It's unbelievable weather here in Ireland. We've been under drought for, it must be 3 or maybe even 4 weeks. It just seems such a long time. And the the land is parched. It's actually parched. The spring well down in the Fairywood, the one that I divined for, is just down to a trickle now. And I don't run off any water in the cottage because the spring well up on the hill that feeds the tank in the attic, or the loft as they say nowadays, is silent. You know, I put my ear to the wooden panelling below it in the cottage and I listen for the sounds of water trickling into it after I've run off a little bit on the taps, and it's perfectly silent. So, no more running off the water in the cottage. I'm really hoping that there's going to be rain soon. Rain was promised for yesterday and didn't happen. It was promised for today, and nothing's happening so far. So, yeah, this is Monday. So I'm really fingers crossed that I get some rain very soon. On a slightly different note, I became very aware through reading all the hundreds of comments I got regarding what happened on Facebook and, you know, the miserable face saga. And it just came home to me that so many women have experienced similar. And it seems to be a real issue in that women rarely talk about these things. I know for myself, I just felt really embarrassed. And if you listen to the previous video, you will hear my recounting of when I was a teenager, when I first moved to London. And of course, those are very influential times in one's life, aren't they? So maybe I should do a video on this at some point. I don't know. I'll have to take time to digest all the comments and to think more sort of in a detached way, if you like, from what I'm reading. Because for me, it's still a very emotional thing, and that doesn't sit well with me, you know. I am by nature a very emotional woman, I can tell you. I cry at the drop of a hat. And I think being an empath at times is a curse because it does make one very emotional. But I feel very, very much a comrade with all those women who have experienced similar, and how it's affected your own confidence and your self-confidence, and sometimes your life. You know, I think to go through one's life always thinking that, you know, your face doesn't fit, or you know, people are staring at particular aspects of you as a person. You know your body. Maybe your body doesn't fit. You know, it does remind me of that song. I must just find out who actually wrote it and sang it. I think it was called 17. And that always puts me back into that time. Yeah. Well, moving on a little bit, and really the whole purpose of my work here, organic gardening. So I started off, as many of you know, with a very raw landscape. And I won't go into that again because there's hundreds of videos about that, and I've also written about it. But I have to say that the real magic in what grows around me now is simply because that for 21 years this land has been completely organic. Now, not certified, and I've no need to certify anything. I know my land, I know what it is. And I'm not producing goods for sale, so it makes no odds really about being certified. But the land itself has, how shall I put it? In terms of growth, the growth has doubled year on year. So what I started off with was, of course, a very large nursery garden. You know, I had hundreds of pots, and they were filled with cuttings and seeds, and they were raised up on small platforms so as they didn't get soaking wet. You know, I created a nursery, which I think is essential when you're starting a garden from scratch, and definitely when you're starting a woodland from scratch. Unless you have thousands and thousands of euro or pounds or dollars to invest in it. But this garden now is completely organic, and you can see for yourselves the amount of abundance. There's hardly a square foot in which to plant anything. In fact, what I'm doing now is I'm planting sort of around trees and under trees. So I'm making little raised beds, edged with wood, mostly wood, and that's logs, you know, from the fallen trees. So everything is going back into the land, unless, of course, I'm using, you know, the wood for the wood-burning stoves, in which case the ashes go into the land. I don't have a bin service here. I don't have a rubbish disposal service here. Everything stays on site, unless, of course, it's plastic, in which case I take that to the recycling centre in my local town of Boyle. Everything else really is used. Well, cans and bottles, you know, go into those recycling banks. That's easy enough to do. But I don't export anything. So ashes from the fires, ashes from the stoves, over 21 years, they're all here on the land. All of it. And used, very much used. And something else which I think is actually really important, which very few people talk about, is the fact that I do have a system, a heating and a water heating and cooking system in my cottage, which relies on a stove. And that's the Stanley stove in the kitchen, which you've seen. Now, so therefore I have a chimney. In fact, I've got two chimneys. And, well, three chimneys if you count the studio. But it means that there is a certain amount of carbon being released. And I have noticed that the trees around the cottage have grown incredibly well. And I think part of that is down to the amount of carbon that they're able to drink. And you know, in return, they expel oxygen. So the air, of course, is very clean, and there's lots of lichens around the place. Something else that's happened recently, which I must just tell you about. For almost 2 decades, there were a pair of bats, okay, 2 bats, living in and around the cottage, I think under the eaves somewhere. The other night, in fact, it was Bealtaine Eve when I had the fire, and myself and a few other people were sitting out around the fire. We counted 4 bats, which is incredible. So even their little population has doubled. And I think bats are in decline overall, actually, in places like Ireland, because the amount of barns and, you know, old cottages with eaves and stuff like that. I mean, a lot of the cottages are being renovated and new roofs are being put on, and everything's been kind of tightened up, so to speak. So you wouldn't have a lot of access now for bats. Although people are putting up bat boxes, but I've never seen bats coming out of bat boxes. So anyway, I'll probably be able to take that one back at some point. But yeah, the essence, I think, of Bealtaine Cottage is, quite frankly, just organic gardening. So just as a little ending to this video, I want to list some of the things that make me happy. Now, that little girl over there makes me happy, so I do everything I can to make her happy. A cup of tea and a sandwich, that makes me really happy. It's almost like everything's okay in the world. Reading a good book. This is what I'm reading at the moment. Robert Harris. He's a brilliant writer. He's an historian, without a doubt, because he takes real history and weaves it into a story, and he's a fabulous storyteller. This is about the lead up to World War I and makes me think about my great uncle Henry, who was killed in World War I. A young man, I think he was only 22, 21 or 22. No body, nothing came home. Yeah. Anyway, those are some of the things that make me happy, actually including thinking about members of my family who are no longer with me. Listening to the birds, that makes me happy. Listening to the chimes, that makes me happy. Listening to the bees, that makes me happy too. What makes you happy? Please share.